reading of the Nut Island effect. So we're going to be talking about this. And as you know, a lot of what's contained in this section is in Bringing Out the Best in People, which is what we're reading right now. So when we finish this section and this discussion, hopefully we'll be able to ascertain why certain behaviors occur more frequently than others. We'll be able to use a technique called ABC analysis for shaping behavior. We'll talk through a reinforcement strategy, and we'll talk about what are some of the principles about designing measurements and feedback systems for measuring performance. And I want to be clear about this one. What we're covering in here is about people performance. It's not necessarily about financial performance or things like that. So that's a little bit different, right? They're not necessarily the same thing. This is behaviorally focused. One other thing I want to point out that a lot of people perhaps don't, that this is not the one solution for everything. I don't want to be a one solution works every time maniac. It's easy to think that these things always work. They don't work when the performer actually can't do the job. So if the performer actually doesn't have the skills to do what they need to do, you either have to get them the skills, or get somebody who has the skills to be able to perform. You can't simply either hold a gun to their head if it's a negative reinforcement, or give them 1,000 or 100,000 attaboys. They're not going to be able to do it if they can't do it in the first place. And I'm acutely aware of that because I can contrast how my children were able to learn things, because that's fresh in my mind. I mean, I have fairly young children, 11 and 9. I can remember very vividly, and I still do, the star charts and things like that we put to help foster behavior of doing their chores, washing the dishes, taking out the garbage, taking out the recycling, visiting grandma, all that kind of stuff. But now I'm also acutely aware of the other side, because as some of you know, I have a close relative who has Alzheimer's disease, my mother, and she cannot perform. She simply can't perform. No matter how much positive reinforcement you give, her memory just doesn't work the same way it did. So it's a totally different ballgame. It's a ballgame of patience, it's a different ballgame, as it would be in business as well. It may not be so much patience as it is just recognition that this person's either in the wrong fit or something like that. Okay, I guess the first premise that I want to go with is, behaviors. Hopefully, you're all bought into the fact that the behaviors are super important in terms of getting results. And just like we think that process is important in driving results, behaviors are super important too. Deming, if you read Deming one way, and I've had somebody say this to me, was that he said something like Deming was all wrong because essentially if you look at the bead experiment, what Deming was trying to say was that people are irrelevant in producing the results. But that's just not true. Well, I would argue that Deming wasn't trying to say that. He was trying to say, I think, that a lot of times employees, if just told to do better, don't have the tools, the means, or the ways to do that, and they have to be empowered to try and solve problems. In the classic red bead experiment, you put a paddle in and pull out a bunch of beads, and you're trying to pull out white beads instead of red beads, and there's a bunch of red and white beads in the bin, and you have to do it blindfolded. And what happens is, in the experiment, is the person is given rewards for pulling out white beads and demerits for pulling out red beads, but they don't really have the ability. There's no way to really control that. I think that in a lot of ways is a good lesson, right? Because it drives us to the recognition to say that, well, look, if we want to eliminate the defects, we actually have to, or stop the defects from occurring. We can't simply say do better. We actually have to get the red beads out of the bowl. And that's kind of Deming's point. I don't think he was trying to say people are irrelevant. And in fact, if you run the experiment, people will, in fact, put the paddle upside down and not pull out any beads, or they'll dump the bucket or something like that. So people are not irrelevant in a lot of those cases as well. It's super important for us to keep in mind as we design better processes that we have to make them work not just with the supervisors and the people who own the process, but the people who execute the process too. So if we create solutions that actually create more work for them doing, if they do a good job for them to create more work and it ends up being punishing, guess what? They'll make sure that it doesn't happen. So, it's just some things to be thinking about. How can we design process fixes that will work and actually have behaviors that we want to have reinforced, and behaviors that we don't want to occur be naturally negatively reinforced. That's kind of what we're talking about in here. All right, and I want to make sure that we get this. Now, the premise in these techniques that we're going to be talking about today, and I'm not saying it's a correct premise either, but it's a useful one, is to assume that people always behave rationally from their point of view. Now, there's a lot of behavioral economics now, and we'll talk about this on Friday, that actually says that that's not true, that people don't behave rationally from their point of view. However, these techniques take a rational look at why people do what they do, and they assume rationality, or they assume some sorts of rationality from people. Okay, ABC analysis is a good example of that. We're going to cover that first. And it really is unfortunate, I've got the yellow boxes there, it really is unfortunate that the frequency of occurrence of behaviors isn't determined by how much we want them to happen, how much they're the right thing. ABC is a skill that, or is a technique, and we'll start with that, that works by shaping consequences. Okay, so I'm a little bit skeptical of some of the research here because it looks like it came out way too clean. But to me, it always was stated that way, and I've never actually seen a lot of the numbers or any of the numbers really. But the assumption, and supposedly backed up by research, is that if we want to try and adjust behaviors, and I actually do believe that it's true, I just am questioning the exact numbers, that we need to know that we need to understand we need to take a consequential view of them. So especially if we're looking to change processes. So one way of looking at this is called ABC, or picnic analysis. Okay, and the idea is that we have essentially behaviors occur in a circle, if you will. I put it as a straight line, but it really is a circle. And any behavior is preceded by what's called an antecedent. Then the behavior occurs, and then there's a consequence for that behavior. Okay? Now I want to make sure that we understand that consequence could be either positive or negative. A positive consequence would be, like for example, going to college. A positive, that's a behavior. A positive consequence might be my earning potential, or my salary goes up after I go to college. But a negative consequence might be that I saddle myself with a lot more debt. So there's both positive and negative consequences. Anyway, the point is that that antecedents, according to the research, drive the initial behavior, whereas if you want repeat behavior, which is most process-oriented stuff that we do, we want people to continually do what they need to do, that consequences shape the repeat behavior. Okay, and just a couple of examples. The phone rings and I answer it, and one consequence is I might get another assignment. Okay, that could be either good or bad depending on your point of view. Another thing is I go to the doctor, I get some advice. Maybe I go jogging as a result of that advice. Maybe he tells me I need to lose weight or exercise more or something like this. And so one consequence of going jogging is I could lose weight. There are plenty of other consequences, right? I could hurt my ankle. That could be a negative one. All right. If I'm tired, I drink a cup of coffee. That means I perk up for a while. That could be maybe a positive consequence. you know, there's certainly negative consequences to that. Dinner is served, I eat vegetables, I still feel hungry. Okay, there's lots of different things where where we have an antecedent behavior and consequence. It's just the examples. Okay, now to use this tool, what we do is we essentially describe all of the consequences for a particular behavior, and we describe them as either positive or negative. And yes, these are like almost like DOE, and not to get too into that again. I promise I won't. Let's see. Okay, I've got it open. There we go. Somehow I can't. This is a flaky tool. I need to think about getting a better one here. Okay, there we go. Nope. All right, well, I'm just going to have to do it the old-fashioned way, I suppose. Let's draw it with the pen. Okay, so essentially, if we look at, so we describe it in 3 dimensions, either positive or negative. So a behavior is, or a consequence is either positive or negative to the performer. It's always from the performer's point of view. It's not what we want, it's to the performer. It either is immediate or future, and it's either certain or uncertain. Now, in the real world, when we actually make our cuts, we categorize things a little bit, right? So it may be 80% certain, in which case you'd say that's pretty much a C. Or it may be 20% certain, in which case you say, well, maybe that's a U. All right. Now, the premise is that behaviors that are that occur frequently will be dominated by picks, whereas behaviors that rarely occur will be dominated by nicks. Let's take a look at an example. So an example of this is if we look at a behavior. Usually you look at a behavior and you look at its complement. So like if you're working for law enforcement, maybe a key behavior would be, well, do people drive above the speed limit? That would be a behavior that we would want to stop. And a behavior that we would want to make happen would be driving at the speed limit or below the speed limit. So let's take a look at how that would work. What might be some consequences of driving above the speed limit? Well, one consequence is I could kill myself. Another consequence is I could kill a pedestrian. Another consequence is, this one happens to be positive, I get to the destination more quickly than I would otherwise. Another consequence is I feel a rush of power. I could get a ticket, but I get to keep up with traffic. So if we look through those and we say systematically go through and say, okay, let's see whether it's positive, negative, immediate or future, certain or uncertain, and we can analyze this. We'll see that there's for example, here's a pick. A pick is a good thing, right? So I get to my destination quicker. That's positive for me. It's immediate. I know that when I press harder on the gas pedal, it's going to happen right away. I'm going to get to that destination, and it's pretty certain. You know, I know the laws of physics enough to know that if I go a little bit faster, I'll get there. Whereas if we look at one of these negative ones, like getting a ticket is certainly negative for me. Well, if that happens, it's probably going to happen in the future. Maybe that's an I don't know. I could be persuaded that's an I. And then, but that's uncertain. Not every time I go over the speed limit do I get a ticket. In fact, that's very uncertain. So that's going to not have as much influence on me. Okay, now let's look at driving at the speed limit. You can see that there's a couple of different things that are nicking me as a driver. Now the interesting thing is if you look at the profile of these, that these tend to be dominated by picks. And this would tend to indicate that, at least for me, that I would tend to prefer driving over the speed limit because I'm rewarded for it. I'm rewarded for it in the short term. I feel positively, generally positive about things because the ones that are most important are the picks. There's more there that are on this behavior. And there's a couple of nicks right here for doing the right thing. So anyway, that's how it works. That's how it works. And so before I go on, I guess I would say, you know, what questions do you have on kind of how on the mechanics of this technique?
Mark, I'm just, you know, where's this chime in with the reality, you know, what you've learned? So, you know, with the real consequence of driving. For example, going faster doesn't always get you to the destination quicker.
Okay. So I think you would argue that this is a U? Is that what you're arguing?
Well, I wasn't going that particular detail, but what I was saying is that, you know, so we have this ABC analysis example, and if you go purely by this example, then you're going to go by the picks.
Right.
Correct?
Right.
But your learned behavior tells you that your analysis is flawed.
Okay, how so?
Because if you go fast, you don't always get there. Because you have in a pure, you know, A to B with no traffic. I mean, there's, you know, you have your learned behavior, then you have what the analysis shows, and there's a big question mark here. So
yeah, so I would say again, there's a couple of different things that are driving this. One is that, and you can certainly enhance this analysis, right? The idea is to get a lay of the land for a specific performer. Okay, so if I feel that I am pretty certain that I get to the destination quicker, and I would say, you know, 9 out of 10s, I get there 5 minutes or so earlier. You know, that's where my thinking is on this one, and
yeah, but
that's how
what I'm saying is, the reality is you don't get there quicker. That's just your thinking. Studies have shown you don't get there quicker. So
okay. Okay, so maybe that would be a way of confronting me by saying, you know, Mark, you think that you're certain to get there quicker, but let me show you this data that actually shows you that it doesn't happen. But what I'm telling you is that if you're using this and you're facilitating with a group or with an individual, and they tell you that it's certain that they will get there quicker, they're going to act on that, and their behaviors are going to bear out, are going to tend to bear that out.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Now I got it. Thank you.
No,
yep, I understand
not a problem.
now.
Not a problem. And, you know, when you're doing this, and we'll talk a little bit about this because we're actually going to do an example. Hopefully we'll do it live. You also have to be a little bit careful with choosing the right things here. So, for example, there's probably 100 different consequences that we could list here, but if we did that, it would take us forever to do it. So what you want to do is kind of get what you think are the most important consequences and the most important consequences for here. Okay, so what I would suggest is, you know, let's first of all look through a number of different places where we could potentially use this. Without kind of going into DMAIC, what are some ideas, or what are some things that, where are some places where you might use this, where you really might want to understand? I guess I would say I would use it sparingly, but when you institute a process change, for example, you might want to really design your process change such that certain behaviors occur. So let me give you a couple of examples. You know, maybe one behavior of behaviors that you want to occur. Let me just call these positive behaviors. Positive from the point of view of I want them to occur. And we'll just list them. So, for example, I've certainly designed many things such that I want people to follow security procedures. That's one of them. I want one thing that I once did as a manager, I wanted people to take their accrued vacation time. Okay? And I wanted them to turn in their work on time. those are all things that, those are all examples of where you might want to use this. So I'd like you to take, look, 111. I'd like you to take, there we go. I'd like you to take, say, let's just take 15 seconds and write down on a piece of paper, and we'll do this together, what might be an example where you might use this technique. Remember, the idea is you want to break down and understand why people might follow this behavior or why they might not. We're not yet talking about shaping. We're just trying to understand why. Okay, 15 seconds. Tick, tick, tick. Okay, let's go around the room and start with this. I'll start. I guess I can start with myself, and I'm going to put in a behavior that I want to see is I want people to don't pad expense reports. Okay, that's a behavior that I certainly want to have happen. Okay. All right, let's go to John. What's a behavior that you would maybe find this technique helpful for?
I want people to exceed their customers' expectations.
Oops. Okay, is that a behavior?
No, that would be an outcome.
Yeah. Okay, maybe take a moment to think about that. This is not always that easy, but that's a great place to start. So we'll work with that one for sure. Let me go to Jim. Do you have one for us?
Yeah, I was thinking new equipment, to use new equipment versus old equipment.
I'll put the word "the" in there, the new equipment. Got it. Oops. Good. Great. Shani?
Mark Shaney stepped out for a second.
Okay. Sue?
I just said follow the procedures as developed.
Follow procedures.
Yep.
Procedures in like an SOP or a new PMP?
Yeah, exactly. So we redesigned a process with the pharmacy team, and they were still doing their own thing rather than the procedure that we developed as a team.
Oh, yeah. Great. Great example. Okay. Let me circle back to John.
Yeah, I think when I get into one is always thank your customer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to build on turning my outcome into a behavior there.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. So that's a great one. That works. Yeah. And a lot of times, when you have an outcome, right, it's really you just need to break it up into constituent parts, and that certainly fills the bill. All right. Excellent. I'm going to add a couple of other ones. So sometimes I want people to participate in meetings. Okay, so that would be a behavior that I would want. Let's see if we can get a couple more here. So Jim?
I think that any type of process change, where if this happens, then people should behave this way, kind of thing.
Okay. So act out on process change. Okay. Again, if this was the if we were going to do an example, which we will do in just a moment, we'd probably want to be more specific on that. But that's exactly where you need to be thinking, right? For most Six Sigma projects, it works like that. for our own behaviors, I know, like for example, Jim happens to have a background in business development. Certainly I've worked with people to say, a positive behavior that I want to engender in a sales staff is make your 10 cold calls every day. So that's a behavior that I might want to have happen if I'm looking at.
Boy, that's a sore spot. Why'd you pick that one?
I know. What do they say? When God made cold calls to punish to keep too many people from going into sales. Oh my goodness. Okay, a couple more. Shani, are you back yet?
No, she's not back.
Okay. Sue?
I have come prepared to meetings.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there's a big one.
I know.
Okay. Okay, excellent. I think we can stop here, but yeah, I mean, there's lots of different things that you can do, either personal or whatever. Why don't we pick one on for this? So everybody, if you can, pick your favorite, and we'll go around the room and we'll just decide one that we can do as an example. You know what? I guess I'm going to be autocratic here, and I'm going to see if we can do. Let's see. Why don't we do a very process-oriented one? Boy, I love the always thank your customer one, and use the new equipment. But why don't we? I'm gonna, and so I'm not trying to nick you guys, but I'm going to try and pick Sue, and that's PIC, right? And we'll do the follow procedures in redesigned SOP. Okay, so we'll do that example, and hopefully we'll see kind of how it works. So I'm just going to insert a page here, and let's kind of go through, and I mean, I think you probably already understand how it works, but there are some little tricks to doing it maybe a little bit better. So the behavior, let's start out with this. So this is the desired behavior, right? Maybe I'll put that over here. Desired behavior, okay. And what we'll do is we'll list some of the consequences underneath it. And then over here we'll have P/N, whether it's positive or negative, whether it's immediate or future, and whether it's certain or uncertain. And this is just meant to be an illustration, so chances are we aren't going to plumb the depths of this. And it's also going to be helpful if we have a specific example in our minds when we're doing this. Of course, in the real world, you would have not just any redesigned SOP. It would have been exactly like Sue said. It would be the redesigned SOP for the pharmacy operations process at Connecticut. That would be much more specific. Okay, so you start out with this, and we're also going to, when you do this, it's also really important to look at the complementary behavior. So this is the undesired behavior, the complement, undesired behavior, and which would be not or don't follow, do not follow procedures in the SOP. So we'll look at the consequences for that as well. So let's start over here, and let's, again, I'm going to take 15 seconds. I would like you to think of, well, what are some positive consequences of following the procedures in the redesigned SOP? Okay, so take 15 seconds and think about what are some positive consequences of following the procedures in the redesigned SOP. Okay, let's start out, and I'm going to try and start with Shani.
She's still not here, Mark.
Okay, so I'm going to start with Sue.
She stepped out to get lunch, so that's why it's just taking her.
Okay.
So go ahead. You want me to
Lunch
talk?
for Connecticut is right across the hall. Just so
No,
everybody
we're
knows.
actually in the opposite side of the building.
Oh, all right. Don't have a bagel there, huh?
No bagel today. Usually we have our lunch, but we didn't today.
Okay, maybe have to nick you for that. Or nick you for that. Okay, what's a positive consequence of following a procedure in a redesigned SOP?
So are you asking me?
Yes.
Okay. I said their job becomes more efficient. There's less rework.
Job.
Less steps. Whatever you want to.
Let's just give one. Job becomes more efficient.
Yep.
Okay, got it. All right, I know this is a bit of a stretch because it's not your process, but give it your best shot. John?
I think it's positive that by following procedures, I get to avoid scrutiny.
Okay, good. Jim?
You get your desired outcome.
Get a desired outcome, and by that you mean what, Jim?
Well, you have a standard operating procedure, you follow it, and it's like following directions. You get the product that you want, or
Got it. So you get, I guess you get better sort of process results, better business results.
yeah, I mean, you get the result you want. I mean, if you don't follow the standard operating procedure, you're going to get less than what you want.
Yep. Okay, got it. So obviously, if we were going to do this for real, we'd probably want to go through and do what we just did, and then come to a consensus on what are the most important consequences that we want to get in. So notice that I'm just pointing this out as an observation. Sue and Jim, and I think I fall into the same category. Instantly, we're looking at, oh, well, if you do this, you're going to get better results, right? Better efficiency, better outcome, and that's where my head's usually at as well. It's sort of what I want to have happen. And notice that John is giving an answer that's directly from the performer's perspective. If I do this, I get to avoid people looking over my shoulder over the time. I get people off my back. That might be a positive consequence. Okay, and when we're doing this sort of thing, it's probably better to be putting ourselves in the way that John did into the performer's shoes, rather than thinking about it from a high perspective. Although that high-level perspective is a good one as well. It's important to do both. Okay, obviously we could get more, but I'm going to move to a different one, and I would say, okay, what are some negative consequences of following the procedures in the redesigned SOP? So let's take 15 seconds to think of that. I see we've got Patrick who's joined us now too. So let's take 15 seconds to think about what are the negative consequences of following an SOP. Okay, now I'm going to go around the room again, and Sue, can I start with you?
Hi, Mark. I'm having a hard time with it because I am a rule follower, so I don't understand.
I can answer this one. It takes longer.
Aha, it takes longer.
Yeah. Danny's
Okay. Great. John, how about you?
It doesn't allow me to adjust to my customer expectation, customize to my
I missed the beginning part, John. I'm sorry.
It doesn't allow me to customize to my customer expectation. I'm sorry, that's just the way it goes. That's just how we have to do things. I'm sorry, I can't.
Got it. Yeah, and sometimes that's something that you need to let go. That's tough in America. We all like to be, we all like to think of our, at least the men here, we all like to think of ourselves as John Wayne. I think, you know, I roll the way I roll. You know, so I actually had somebody once who told me that there's a reason why I have the whole padding expense reports. There was somebody when I confronted him with it, an employee. He wasn't padding, but he was spending a lot more than was allotted in the contract. And when I asked him, you know, what is, you know, why was he doing this or whatever, he said, "Hey, I eat and drink what I eat and drink. That's the way I roll, baby." I said, "Okay, that's fine. You just need to pay for it. No sweat. Can't bill the client." Okay, excellent. That's great. I love that example. Okay, Jim.
Well, I like to think of myself as Paul Newman, but that's okay. I'm thinking of injury or loss of life.
Okay, injury or loss of life. But what's the consequence? Oh, the consequence is I may be injured.
Yes.
Possibly seriously. Okay. All right, good. Patrick, let's get one from you.
I have been here for 15 seconds, and I have no idea what you're doing.
Okay, got it. All right, so we'll move on then. And actually, that makes sense because now we've got this balanced. But now what we can do is we can go over what we're doing is we're doing ABC analysis, and it's in the Week 7 slides and behavioral techniques. We're doing an example of a desired behavior. We're trying to understand why people would follow a procedure in a redesigned SOP or would not. So obviously we could do the same thing with the negative behaviors to brainstorm, get a better list, and then, again, down select to get there. Now, when we do the undesired behavior, just to, you know what, I'm going to hold off on that one, and we'll just focus on the top right now. Now, I've almost defined this so that the first piece of it is already done, isn't it? So we've already decided whether it's positive or negative, and so we'll put that in for these. These are all P's. Now keep in mind, for some people, I get to avoid scrutiny might not be positive, and for some people, it doesn't allow me to customize might be positive. One of those things that people often say with how do we reward, I know it's not quite the same thing, but how do we reward people for doing a good job in Six Sigma? It used to be a knee-jerk reaction to say, well, they get to do a presentation publicly to senior management. Can you imagine? I mean, there's a lot of people who are not like I am, who are like total hams, but are you know, shy, and they don't want to do. That's the last thing that they want to do, is get up there and share everything publicly. That would be a real negative for them. So it is important to think about things from the performer point of view. Okay, let's go through now and talk about whether each of these is immediate or future. So let's think about this one. My job becomes more efficient. For most process changes, does that happen immediately or in the future? Well, I don't know. What do you think? I guess I'll just take some thoughts.
I would say immediate.
Okay.
That would be my guess. What do you think, Shannon?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for a lot of cases, depending on the level, it becomes immediate. But for some things, if the procedure does take longer and it's harder for me to do, a lot of times that doesn't happen right away. Mm-hmm. So, but having said that, if it does become more efficient, it probably happens right away. I'm going to be inclined to put in an I there, but you obviously would need to you know what, I'll flag that as yellow because it could be a little bit different. I get to avoid scrutiny. Immediate or future? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was thinking future.
Okay, why?
Well, because this example is the pharmacy project that I worked specifically on, and you didn't audit right away. You audited the past week, so you weren't getting immediate feedback. So I was just looking at it from an audit standpoint.
Okay, got it. Got it. Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, get the desired results. I guess we'll let you know what, Sue. I'm going to ask you to take the lead on this because this was yours. Talk about nicking you. I'm putting you on the spot here.
Okay. Get desired outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Better business results. Again, I think it's kind of a little bit linked to the first one. Job becomes more efficient. It could be immediate, but it also could be future. It depends on how you're measuring that.
Yeah. So what were the better business results?
That wasn't mine, actually. I don't. Mine was the first one.
Yeah. So, if you think about things like, I'm going to put a future on that one. If you think about things like doing the right thing in a project or whatever, a lot of times, the results things come way in the future. Like, for example, take bonuses, for example, people's bonuses. In a lot of ways, bonuses tend to not be huge motivators because they come after a long time, unless they're kind of entitlements, in which case it doesn't really even matter, and in a lot of cases it's not driving behaviors. So I'm going to put future on that one, but again, you can be you could veto me on that if you need to. I'm just putting it in for illustrative purposes. All right, now how about this one for the negatives? It takes longer to follow the procedures in the redesigned SOP. Does that happen right away, or does it wait a while for that kick to kick in?
I would say it's immediate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Oops, these are all negatives. Right. Doesn't allow me to customize.
Immediate. Immediate.
May be injured, possibly seriously.
Future.
Oh,
A paper cut.
paper cut. Yeah, I think this is a business, this is an office process. So, although I've seen some in mail rooms, I've seen some pretty vicious things happen. We're not talking about a forklift accident or something like that. So, but maybe injured, that's probably future, yes? Okay. Oh, you said immediate, but we'll put an immediate there. Okay, now let's go through the certain uncertain. And again, there's a scale on this. Metaphysical certitude, as who's the guy McLaughlin used to say, isn't usually possible. So we just kind of want to use 80-20 rule. So my job becomes more efficient. Certain or uncertain? Depends, right? In some cases, if you haven't done your homework right, and people aren't really certain that this is going to really work, then that often becomes an uncertainty, right? So just for sake of illustration here, I'm going to put an uncertain there.
Okay.
Get to avoid certain scrutiny, certain or uncertain.
That's uncertain.
Okay, I'll put uncertain there. I get the desired outcome, better business results.
If it's a predictable process, you should be able to get better results, yes.
Okay, good. So if we have, if we are pretty certain about these things, let's put a certain here, just for the heck of it. I'm going to take off the I there. And we'll do the same thing. It takes longer. Certain or uncertain?
Certain.
Doesn't allow me to customize. Certain or uncertain?
Certain.
May be injured, possibly seriously.
Uncertain.
Uncertain. Okay. Good. All right. So you can see that, and I don't claim to that this is anyway a complete analysis right now or anything like that. But just as it's shaping up, we'd want to do the same thing now for the undesired behavior. And usually what you can do is you can do turnarounds on each of these guys right here. So do not follow procedures in the redesigned SOP. My job stays inefficient. Do not follow procedures in redesigned SOP. I do not avoid scrutiny. Does that make sense? A lot of times you simply turn it around and you can then start to see how it all plays out. But just very quickly, we can see right away that we've got a couple of red flags right here. There's 2 nicks and there's no offsetting picks. So just in the quick cursory analysis, we know that many SOPs, or many times when we create an SOP, we're nicking people for doing the right thing. So how would we then, just as an example, how would we start to say, well, how could we shape this so that we don't nick people? What would be some things, and again, I'm not saying this is easy or anything like that, but what would be the things that we would try and do to shift this around, to make this desired behavior happen more often? Any ideas good here? Well, that's not true, but I just want to hear from you. I promise not to nick you.
Add people so that it's not a problem if it takes longer.
Okay, good. So, yeah, and I was thinking in terms of not that specific, so that's a great example. I was thinking more like, well, make this so that it doesn't take longer. Essentially, change that to an uncertain, right? Or maybe give, as you say, add people so that it doesn't matter that it takes longer, or maybe train people so that it takes shorter. Again, I'm not sure that that's doable, but if you're able to do that and make that positive, immediate, and certain, then you can offset that. Okay, great. So I guess the short answer, and by the way, that was a fantastic example. The short answer is we can try and change. We need to add picks to the positive, or to this here, and we need to try and eliminate nicks somehow. You might want to work with this one. Make it certain that your job becomes more efficient, right? Which is kind of what Shani was talking about. Or we could make it more immediate, that you get to avoid scrutiny. Or we could make the desired outcome more quickly occurring. We could find an alternative measure so that people are getting quicker feedback. All right. Okay. So hopefully you get the gist of this. From 2 things that you ought to notice is, one, this is going to take some time, because you have to put yourself in the performer's shoes. You have to think about what consequences make sense and what consequences don't. What are the things that are going to be most important? And it's not totally easy. The positive negative one's fairly easy, but the immediate and future is tough, and the certain uncertain is a tough one too. Like I said, use the 80-20 rule, and I think that'll help you on the certain uncertain, right? If it's 80% certain, then it's certain. Okay, or if it's, I don't care if you use the 70-30 rule, whatever rule works for you. Anyway, so hopefully we're there. The other thing I think that you will have noticed, and it probably violates, Aubrey Daniels would probably come in and tell me this is the wrong way to do it, but I have found that when I facilitate this, I get much better results if I ask people separately for what are some positive consequences of procedures, of following procedures in a redesigned SOP. And then I ask them, well, what are some negative consequences? And the reason is because consequences itself is a negatively connotated or connoted word in our society. So when I ask, well, what are the consequences, usually people give me negative consequences. So I take some time to ask for positive consequences. The second reason is that a lot of times people give the answers that they think you want to hear. So it's which is not necessarily helpful. So for example, on the coming late to meetings, a lot of people will say, well, what are the consequences? Well, I don't get to hear the things that I possibly would miss, and that hurts my job. Yes, that's true. I might get chewed out by my boss. Yes, that's true. But they often miss all the positive consequences of coming late. Well, I get to finish the previous meeting. I get to miss a boring part of the meeting where the person just waits anyway. So I don't have to hear all the rehash when somebody joins. So there's lots of positive reasons why people come late. Otherwise, they wouldn't come late. or turn in work on time, or not, or not take doctor's advice, or smoke, or whatever. So anyway, it's a useful tool. I find it very useful, and use it sparingly, but it's a good technique. All right, questions and comments before we move on to a different part of the discussion. Okay. All right, good. I'd like to talk a little bit about reinforcement, and I think at this point, maybe there's some things that are in the book, but I think maybe what I would rather do instead of going to that is just to kind of get some comments on reinforcement you've read the things in the book, and I guess let's start out with like having kind of a discussion about what's the difference between reinforcement and reward, or positive reinforcement and reward, and negative reinforcement and punishment. Isn't that the same thing? And what's different about them? Let's go to here. Let's put reinforcement. Okay, so let's start out with that. So when we talk about positive reinforcement, which the author is definitely a big proponent of, and I am too, what's the difference between that and reward? Is that the same thing?
Hey, Mark, didn't he line out that the positive reinforcement needed to be more of an individualized, I guess, item to where it's more from knowing the employee as opposed to just kind of coming across a, everyone gets $10 type reward?
Good. Yeah, good. So we'll talk about some principles of that, or some principle ideas, spelled PAL, ideas. I had the right one first, but we'll talk about principle ideas. And certainly giving individual reinforcement / feedback, right, is best, at least according to the author, and I also concur on that one.
I think that there's no question that positive reinforcement intends to increase the frequency of the previous behavior.
There you go. Okay, so I think that's the key thing with positive reinforcement. We're trying to increase behaviors, or by definition, a positive reinforcer is something that increases the behavior of something, a certain behavior. So if for example, I give somebody a bonus because of performance, and let's say the performance drops, that bonus was by definition not a positive reinforcer. It didn't increase the behavior. Now, again, it might have been helpful in some ways, so maybe that wasn't the greatest example. But there's lots of things that we give out as rewards that actually don't turn out to be positive reinforcers. And by the same statement, a negative reinforcer is something that, by definition, causes a behavior to stop occurring or to lessen, to decrease in frequency. So that's distinct from punishment, right? So I can punish somebody, and if the behavior does not decrease, then by definition it is not a negative reinforcer. Does that make sense? So it's kind of hard to find out what are really reinforcers, and it kind of works by, as you say, by testing. Now, I guess the real question is, would you say that at most work environments, and you can include your own right now, do you find that what is the norm? Is it positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement that's the norm? Obviously, reward and positive reinforcement go hand in hand together. we'd like them to be 100% in line, and punishment and negative reinforcement go hand in hand together, but they don't always. What would you say the environments usually are in your current or past work environments? What are you more familiar with seeing?
I would say in many environments it's typically negative marks.
And why would you say that, Shanny? What would be an example of one? You don't have to be specific because we don't want to name names.
Well, I'm not. I'm basing it off of my history of working at other insurance companies, actually.
Yes.
And because Connecticut, I find, is a little bit better at the positive reinforcement, where people do kind of say thank you and appreciate an effort that you put in. But in other organizations, you can do behaviors, and typically you're not rewarded or given positive feedback for that behavior. You're only said, well, that was great, but you didn't get it in, you got it in a day late, or it's like they always look for the negative part of it, so you feel like, why even bother?
Aha. So that's kind of interesting. I think what you're saying, that example that you gave is a great one of you did a good job, but yes. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Is that a positive reinforcer or a negative reinforcer? And I think your contention is that most people view that as a negative reinforcer.
Yes, because the but discounts everything that was made in the first statement.
That's right. Yeah. So that's interesting. So I want to. I think you're spot on that one. And what do people?
I'd like to go one step deeper on that. I believe that many of the positive reinforcement reasons why we do what we do are more passive. And then if we're trying to change behavior, the negative reinforcers will often take over. I know that we have lots of positive reinforcement. Why do I come to work today? Well, because I'm going to get paid every 2 weeks. Or because it's going to be nice people that I work with and things like that. But if we're really trying to change behaviors, often the negative reinforcers will be some of the things that will be used to create the motivation for the change.
Okay. Tend to be active. I love that. That's a great comment. I hadn't really thought of it that way. Tend to be passive active. Okay. Yeah, and it is interesting that I think many of us do tend to think our gut reaction is to things like a process is, well, we just have to make people hold people accountable for the work that they're doing or that they're not doing, or we have to give feedback on you're not doing the job, and if we essentially just tell them where they need to be, they'll be able to get there. I think that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and there used to be a phrase, and I think it came up in one of our discussions, John, where you said that you often, you spend a good amount of time looking for things that people did well, right? Catch somebody doing, what was the phrase? Catch somebody doing it right, or something like that.
Caught in the act.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that can be overdone too, but I think there's a point there, is that we tend to do that. Getting back to you did a good job, but I think that's a huge one. And many of us in management, and when I went to consulting school, I didn't really do that, but when I went to consulting school, I was taught a specific technique, and it was taught as a technique called the sandwich. Has anybody ever heard that one? So yeah.
That good?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So you start out, and somebody turns in a piece of work, and it may be really good or it may be really bad, but the way that you soften the blow is you say, thank you, this is excellent. This is and I'm going to exaggerate here, thank you, this is excellent. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. But, it really is terrible, and here's why. And, oh, but you know what? This was really fantastic anyway, and good job. That's essentially how the sandwich works. As Patrick said, good, bad, good. You give them a good, then give them a bad, and then end on a high note. Well, that's a technique. What I could tell you is that my view is that most people, and I know research bears this out, most people see that as negative reinforcement, or it's punishment. Most people view that as punishment. They remember the but. So that's interesting. Okay. All right, good. I'd like you to think of a couple of examples that you thought were pretty good, or think of an example that you thought was good tactically, where you or somebody else used positive reinforcement. And take 15 seconds to do that. If you can't do that in 15, you can have another 15. I'll just capture some of these. Okay, I'll go around. But one of the things I want to share with you, one of mine that actually I didn't come up with, but I was happy that the team lead did. I was working in this comes from last year. I was working in a food wholesaler, a plant, a warehouse, and we were working with people who counted boxes, and we were trying to get them to stop counting boxes mentality, and stop that counting boxes mentality, and move to a I'm somebody who creates better quality mentality. So we couldn't have them, if they finished counting their allotment, what they were doing was they would finish counting their 10,000 boxes, and then they were so used to being measured on counting boxes that they would count another 10,000. We wanted them to stop doing that. So we put in some reinforcers. We couldn't have them, sitting in the lunchroom munching on candy bars or drinking soda or smoking cigarettes or whatever it was that they did, which would have been natural reinforcers. But we looked for things that they liked to do, or they thought were the fun part of the job, and they got to pick from a menu of those. So they either got to let's see, once they finished counting boxes, they could either walk the aisles. Now this was kind of fun because they got to walk and all the and see all the food and comment on how there were some things that were they were like broken pallets. They would get to fix those things. They'd be able to see damaged salad dressing and all that kind of stuff, and they like to point that out. Or they could get certified on running their these electronic or gas powered jacks that they could move in and out food in and out of trucks and things like that and across the way, and that was good for their careers, and they could potentially get higher pay. And there were some other things that they would be able to get to work on as well. There were like 3 or 4 things, and the individual performer could pick on what they wanted to do. So that worked out pretty well. It actually got them to quit counting boxes and to start doing some other things that were there. So that's my quick example. Well, not quick, but all right. So let me go to Jim. Jim, what's an example where you've had either observed or you've done some positive reinforcement that you thought really worked?
Well, this is a very personal one for me. Lesson I've learned is that if you sow positive seeds, you may not always get positive results, but if you sow negative seeds, you will always get negative results.
Ooh.
And where this happened to me was when I was growing up, my dad was a real hard ass on every job I did. He always pointed out lack of quality or something I could have done better first. So I was picking up my son one day, and he wanted to show me, he laid some carpeting on the porch steps, and he wanted to show me what a good job he did. And the first thing I noticed was that he could have hidden the carpet tacks, which was what my dad taught me. So I chose to ignore that. And I pointed out how nice and straight he made the cuts and how there were no gaps and how it fit nice and tight. I pointed out everything positive I could say about this and chose to ignore the exposed tacks. And he got in the car and we get down the road. We didn't even ride a half a block when he said, the next time I do that job, I'm going to hide the tacks underneath.
Cool.
So, you know, you don't always have to point out the positive. You know, you have to kind of give people credit for being intelligent. And, you know.
Yeah. Now, what you could have potentially done also is at a slightly after letting some time pass, maybe even in that car ride, if he didn't notice it, you could say, you know, I was thinking, right? Because now you've let an event go by. You'd say, you know, I was thinking, what you did was really great. I have an idea that maybe you could make it even a little bit better. And here's how. You know, that might be another way if it's really not acceptable.
So do you know how much the temptation was? Because I am my father's son.
Mm-hmm.
But the temptation, and I kept saying, I'm not going to say anything about those tacks. I'm not going to say anything about those tacks. I'm going to stay 100% positive. And then he came back. So that was the positive reinforcement, was on me.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Very cool. Very cool. All right. Patrick, do you have an example for us?
You know, I tend to be pretty simple, but just any time, this has happened a couple times recently, where you're just putting a lot of hours into something, and, you know, after a big presentation, you know, one of our executives came up and just said, hey, I recognize the fact that you did a lot of work on that, and I appreciate your time. And I think just the fact that he recognized that it wasn't something simple, and there's a ton of work that went into it, and that he knew that I was working hard, just having that immediate feedback really helps.
Yeah. So I think, you know, that's probably the best thing to kind of end on this one. And if anybody has any other examples, no, I shouldn't nick anybody. We'll go all the way around. But I do want to mention there was one time when I worked with he was a CEO of a small company, and he told me, he said, my quality guy just isn't doing what he needs to do. And I said, okay, you know, we designed this thing where it was a very specific behavior that he was to post every day the customer returns on a graph, and he put this graph outside of his cubicle, and he was supposed to post it every day. We designed it so that he would, you know, print out a new graph every day and post it. And I said, you know, Arthur, who was the CEO, I said, Arthur, now what would really happen is, what would really help is just for you to come by and acknowledge that he did it. Not to say, oh, I see anything about the customer returns, whether they're going up or down, because that tells you some expectations about what you expect the customer returns to be. That's contrary to, or that just, it's irrelevant with respect to the behavior that you want, which is just you need him to be doing, to be providing the information. And so what Arthur did was, for the next week, it was every day, and then he lowered the frequency a little bit as time went on. But he just came by and said, hey, Dan, I see that you posted that you posted results. Didn't say good job, didn't say bad job, just say, hey, I see you posted those results. That was it. It's just recognition that, oh, somebody's paying attention, and that made a difference. So that's good. It's even better when it can be positive, too. Okay. John, do you have an example for us? Okay, it looks like John may be off the phone for a moment. Shani, or Shani and Sue Combo, do you have an example for us?
For me, I'm more simple as well, that I just, you know, like I had a coaching session this morning, and, you know, it's more of just providing that positive feedback to see, you know, yep, I see here your accuracy has been pretty low, but I noticed that you've slowed down. It looks, you know, you're doing very well. I could see this, and And I just, that's my approach with positive feedback, is I like to actually personalize it and face-to-face.
Okay. Face-to-face. Okay, I think that's also very helpful. Yeah, that's good. Very good. Okay, and Sue, did you have one that you want to share with us?
Sue stepped out for a second. She'll be right back.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's enough. That's there, and we can talk about how things can be designed with respect to that. I'd like to move on to, if we could, and there were things that were in there from the all of the there's plenty of things that can be designed into a process that are usually pretty simple to do. Many are, and they don't have to involve money. Okay, I want to make that clear. Positive reinforcement does not have to involve money. All right. I want to talk a little bit about measurement and feedback, and for this, maybe we'll use another. I'll just use another sheet as well. And these are some of the things that you're going to read about in your next assignment, and let's just talk a little bit of this. So I want to start out by asking the question. Let's talk about measurement first. So we all know that that there's plenty of things where people there's plenty of places where people are measured, and there's plenty of places where people are not measured. So I'd like you to think of, in your business, where's a place where measurement, now we're talking about performance, performance measurement, right? Where's a place in your business where people are measured a lot? Okay, and I'd like you to just think of that, again, 15 seconds. Where's a place in your business where people are measured a lot? Okay, so let's kind of go. I hate that word, but okay, I'm going to use it anyway because I used it verbally. So where's a place where people are measured a lot in your business, Patrick?
Staffing, the different units and their ratios to whatever staff they have.
Would that be like a
It's called nursing floors.
Nursing. Yeah, that's kind of,
nursing.
yeah, that's kind of what I was looking at. Nurses, measured out the wazoo, as they used to say, right? Okay. All right, excellent. Shani?
Claims for us?
Claims processing. Right. Jim? Jim, are you with us?
Sorry, I had you muted.
Oh, that's okay.
Number of sales closed.
Oh, okay, yeah, sales staff, often heavily measured. Okay, got it. All right, and Sue?
I have our call center.
Call center. Okay, good. So, and John, I don't know if you're back on the line. Okay. I think those are all examples, excellent examples of where people are measured a lot. Now, how about a place where people are measured little? So, if at all. Or maybe even put if at all. Okay. So let's kind of go back around the room on this one. Patrick?
I'm trying to think about that one. Get back to me on that. I haven't thought
Okay,
yet.
Sounds good. All right, Shani?
You're on mute. No. Oh, I was thinking the training department, that we have metrics for our students, but not necessarily a lot of metrics for ourselves.
Got it. So, by the way, I think that this is a good thing to recognize. Six Sigma departments often, or process excellence departments, often don't measure themselves very well. So if you're doing that, good. That's good for you. Okay, excellent, good.
I came up with one, Mark.
Okay.
What about strategic planning
Oh,
implemented and whether it actually drives the purpose of the plan?
got it. All right. And Jim?
I would have to say contribution to your individual contribution to the bottom line.
And what area would that be? All areas?
I'm trying to think of a way to put this, but it would be you tie a person's efforts right to profit.
Okay, got it. So I got it. So yeah, so often measuring very tactical things. So maybe one place where that would be borne out would be, say, maybe the legal department, right? I'll just I know I'm putting words in your mouth, but
No, that's a good one. I was trying to think of one. That's a very good one.
yeah. So often we don't measure, or maybe we do, caseloads of lawyers, efficiency of the lawyer, that kind of thing, right? How many bathroom breaks the lawyer took. Which, by the way, in a call center, a lot of times people are measured on things like that. So anyway, I'm just trying to get us to think of that do that kind of thinking for just a moment. And then Sue, do you have an example for us?
I was thinking the marketing department,
Uh-huh.
like communications, marketing.
Right, which is interesting. So I just wanted us to kind of look at this, and it's not surprising. I don't necessarily have an answer for this. It's not surprising, but typically where we're looking at things that are measured a lot, it's production, right? Production and operations. So nursing staff, claims processing, sales staff. Sales is really like manufacturing, if you think about it. Marketing is more like the product development sort of realm of business development. A good salesperson is certainly doing a lot of business development. Call center, right? Call center, that's just the end of the line for a lot of our operations. Whereas a lot of the things that we have down here are less tactical. I think you could probably argue that the training department is fairly tactical. But certainly these others tend to be more strategic in nature, and certainly its mission, training is fairly strategic. If you don't believe me, you shouldn't wonder why training is often cut first when, or one of the first things that's cut when there are our efficiencies or expenses that need to be cut. Okay, now going with this, I just wanted to do this to kind of ground our thinking. I want to ask the next question, which is, do people like being measured? Yes or no? And why? So I want you to think about that for a little bit, and then I'd like us to have a little discussion about, do people like being measured? Because we're talking about measuring people here. Okay, so I'd like to kind of open it now, since we've had a little bit of time to think about it. Not much, but do people like being measured? I'll take any sort of opinions or comments or whatever. Yes, no, why, maybe, why?
Mark, it's Patrick. I think that it can be yes and no. I think there's something that's kind of comforting about being measured because you know what you're shooting for, but also on the negative side, I feel like it also can make that feel like they're reduced to that measurement and that all of the intangibles that go into their job are not taken into account. It's just whether or not they, yes or no, they hit their measurement.
Right. I think first of all, I do agree that you're right with that answer. It really is a yes. Maybe it's and or. I talk about legal, so I'm going to be a lawyer right here and say yes and or no. Could be and or it could be both. Yeah. So I think most people's gut reaction is to say no first, or many. That's just an opinion, by the way, which you're free to disagree with. But if it's no, and I think you let's talk about why it would be no. And if it's no, why would it be no? Well, I think one of Patrick's things that he said was sort of, you can't measure what I do. Or fully. You can't fully measure what I do. Right? Did I get that more or less right?
Yep.
Okay. What other reasons or similar sort of reasons would it be, no, I don't like to be measured? What would be some other?
Just the observation of somebody doing what they do creates fear, which affects their performance.
Yes. So the observation definitely can create fear. Now, I like that. So that's definitely true. So the real question, I think, is and the reason why you can't fully measure what I do matters to people is that there's a lack of trust. Right? If I trust that you will take into account that, hey, I'm a good lawyer just because I have a caseload that's small in terms of number of counts, you'll take into account that there's some complexity here, and that I get better outcomes because I really care about what I do. All those things, by the way, can be measured, right? So, but if there's a lack of trust, if you don't believe me that I'm going to actually take that into account, you probably will seek to avoid measurement or pervert my measurements to where they don't really illuminate what's being done anyway. Okay, so how can we get to yes on this? What are some things that would help us get to yes on having people not only be measured profitably, but actually not try and hide measurements or pervert measurements or lie on measurements? By the way, all that stuff is done all the time, whether we like it or not, right? If I tell people to lower inventories, they're going to find a way to make that metric look good. I want them to make it look good if that's what I really care about. I want them to make it look good by actually doing good. But that's not the only way to make a number go up, right? I could falsify it. I could do all kinds of stuff that benefit me in the short term but kill me in the long term. Lots of things I can do. What are some ways that you can maybe help get people to get to yes?
Well, this whole lack of trust thing, I mean, each individual, I mean, I may be able to gain one person's trust fairly quickly, and it may take me years to gain another person's trust. I mean, that's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that not necessarily, I guess, the consequences of making it or not making it, for the fact that if I'm being measured and the guy next to me is as well and he's not doing as well, but there's not as much punishment, then, not punishment, but it's not a negative consequence, then maybe I'm not going to work as hard.
You got it. You got it. So I think that both of those statements have a lot of truth in them, but I'm going to summarize what I think. First of all, it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight, especially if, and let me just posit this, that a lot of companies in the past have used measurement on people as a punisher, effectively as a punisher, and that it takes time to create the trust that's there, and that the way that you do that, and I'm going to put behavioral language in here, but I loved what you said, Patrick, and I'm going to try and paraphrase it here. Pair positive reinforcement with measurement, or basically, I'll just say pair reinforcement with measurement. So, for example, then this presumes that I have the wherewithal to measure things that are good measurements. But having said that, that kind of covers what's there, right? If I continue to be punished for doing the right thing or for measuring the right thing, I'm going to stop doing that right thing. I'm not going to start hitting my metrics. So an example that I had was I had a fellow consultant who went in and they were constantly being asked about how can we keep the engineering hours down. Now, they were not in a expense reduction mode. They were in a growth mode in this particular company. This was a growth company in the early 2000s, involved with the oil industry, and it was in Texas. In any event, very senior manager went on engineering hours. Now, this person worked with that very senior manager. He was general manager of the whole unit, and helped to reorient that person's thinking to think in terms of throughput. It's what we actually produce that's good, and the volume of that, not the engineering hours that it took to do that. We are already capacity constrained. We're using all the engineering hours that we've got anyway. And that worked pretty well. It worked pretty well until that particular senior manager decided to walk through the plants and nick everybody anyway and say, well, yeah, you're doing that throughput, but look at how many engineering hours you're using. Guess what? They adjusted it so that they were doing less engineering hours because that's what he cared about. It's not easy to pair that. Now, the author, I think, gives a few other ideas about sort of creating measurements that I think you'll think are I hope you'll find are helpful, and they're part of the assignment that's coming up as well. And the principles that he gives are we'll talk through this a little bit. Let's see, count rather than judge. So that's one of the principles here. So if we create measurements that count rather than judging people, right? If we actually count occurrences of things happening, people tend to view those as more fair. Now, we can't always do it, but if we can do it, it's probably better than saying, it's probably better to measure somebody how far they actually flew in the ski jump rather than saying they did it with great style. Okay? So if you can, count rather than judge. Let's see. If possible, use raw numbers rather than cooked. Okay. So why? What is that all about? So again, it kind of comes to if you can count occurrences of something, that works better than usually doing a percentage of times that something happened. There's a couple of different reasons for that. One is that if you understand percentages, you always have to understand the base from which you're taking. So just a couple of simple examples. Suppose you have a 30% increase in something, and then a week later you have a 30% decrease. You might think that you're at the same place, but in fact you're not. You're actually below where you started. Just that example in and of itself shows you how sneaky proportions can be. Sometimes we can't avoid them and they're important to use, but sometimes they're not helpful. Other times, for example, in errors created, if you have a defect rate of say 5% and you have and you produce 100 widgets, well, you've produced 5. Well, you might say, well, I improved quality by going to 4%, but if I actually made 200 widgets, I actually have more defects than I had before. Maybe that's important, maybe it's not. But the point is that when you're not using cooked numbers, you can tell that right away. Again, not always possible. And a third one that I think is very important to think about is especially when you're looking at people, is to not rank but rate. So what's the difference? So go ahead.
Oh, one has a better than quality to it if you're ranking people, if you're better than.
Yeah, so exactly. So rating, there's a number of people, a lot of academics, in fact, who claim that we should be measured on a ranking formula. That is that people who do better than their peers should be rewarded, and people who don't should be punished, or something like that, or not rewarded at least. And whether that's true in terms of salary increase or anything like that is kind of up for grabs. But in terms of measuring performance, we need to be a little bit careful here. If we know what we're doing, we should be able to set goals that will be positively met for our business. Like if we set these performance goals, it will be positive for our business. And if we're smart about it, we can design it so that everybody, if they choose to, can win, right? So if we have specific performance goals, and we say that I don't know, I want everybody to be able to create 1,000 sheets per day, and that actually does get us to be where we need to be in terms of our performance, then I want everybody to be there. Ranking engenders all sorts of unhealthy competition that actually kills a lot of collaboration and cooperation. Think about it this way: if you had 7 warehouses and they were being judged on quality, and they were being ranked, and the plant managers knew they were being ranked, and they were being compensated based on their ranking, and everybody knows that, well, what incentive, if you were number 6, would there be for you to go to number 7 and say, hey, here's a way that we can improve quality, and let me show it to you? Now, as a business, you certainly want that to happen, but you can see how that dynamic could easily happen. In fact, it does. Anyway, I just wanted to put those out as a few things that would be food for thought as you're designing your measurements, and some thoughts on that. Now, I guess I'll take any sort of comments or that on the counting rather than on some of these creating measurements ideas.
Mark, you make me think of one of your favorite subjects, which is baseball.
Uh-huh.
And they measure everything.
They do.
And, baseball players, they don't seem to get upset because I think they're used to being measured on everything all the time, because you're really good baseball players. You can trace it all the way back to Little League.
Right. And I think. Oh, go ahead.
So I think if you've grown up in an environment where you're not measured, and then all of a sudden you're going to be measured, that creates a lot of fear. Where again, back to the baseball example, if you're used to being measured on everything since the time you're a little kid, it's no big deal.
That's true. That is true. Excellent. Yeah. And there's a great book out. I'm sorry, there was a book and then there's a movie out called Moneyball. I think it was up for the Academy Award. Didn't win. It stars Brad Pitt. So if you haven't seen that, you should see it. And it's really all about what measurements make sense and what measurements don't. But one thing that baseball has, I think, that really is important and important to keep in mind is without measurement, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between, say, a 300 hitter. If you know baseball, a 300 hitter is basically a yardstick by which people are judged as good hitters, one yardstick, which people are judged as being good hitters or not good hitters. The difference between a 300 hitter and a 275 hitter, in other words, a star and an average person, is like 1 hit every 2 weeks. You wouldn't even see that if you were just observing with the naked eye. So measurement can really be very effective. Okay, well, I see it by the clock on the wall that I've gone over, and I just wanted to point out that there's a couple of things that we didn't get to cover today. Big surprise. We didn't talk about pairing measurement with feedback. In your assignment, you're asked to read that over. That's kind of comes from sections 11 and 12, or chapters 11 and 12, and bringing out the best in people. And we didn't talk about characteristics of good teams. I'd like to talk a little bit about that next time, because I'd like to get your opinions on that, and I'd like to discuss it as a group. And I'd also like to get your opinion, if you can, before Friday, give the Nut Island Effect, that HBR article, a good read, and or a quick read anyway, and then we can discuss it, because I think it's very interesting. It's about how good teams go bad. They start from an excellent performing team and become a team that just creates horrible results for folks. So that's there. There's also, I just wanted to bring this to your attention, there's a fantastic book, a nice follow-up book if you want to read it, very easy to read, called Oops by Aubrey Daniels, and it's about management behaviors, specific management behaviors that get businesses into trouble, and what you might do to get beyond them. And he covers these 13. He picked 13, obviously, for obvious reasons. And he covers these 13 examples: employee of the month, having stretch goals, performance appraisals. So he talks about that, pervasiveness of ranking, rewarding things a dead man can do. That's my favorite, one of my favorites. Talks about issues with giving salary and hourly pay. You did a good job, but, and the sandwich. Overvaluing smart, talented people, which is interesting. Budgeting, promoting people no one likes, downsizing, and M&A, mergers and acquisitions. It's a good read. I wouldn't say that I agree with everything that's in there, but hey, that's what a real book is all about, is creating at least some things that are some of the things in there are provocative, and it makes sense from a behavioral point of view. All right, so I'm going to stay on the line, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to field them. But I think I'm gonna end the recording right now, and we'll see you on Friday. Don't forget you have the assignment. I think that's due next. I don't remember whether it's next Thursday or next. I think it's next Thursday. It's just mostly reading, so you should be able to get it done on time. And call me if you have any questions, technical or other. Love to hear from you. Okay? All right.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, you're welcome. See you guys.
Good day.